Hey Bikeaholics, Ryan Urlacher here, lawabidingbiker.com. Oscar sitting next to me, KLR on the lift behind us. Today's video, we're going to show you how to put Cogent Dynamics front suspension on the KLR, of course. And what's this suspension about? What are we doing here?
It's a kit, so we're going to do forks, fork oil, and valves. So we're going to take the forks off, we're going to dump the guts out, put new guts in, and put it all back together.
And this is a really nice way to improve the performance of your KLR. A couple reasons you would do this is, number one, on dirt. Jump in, Oscar, if you find anything. But on dirt, you're not going to be bottoming out as much. It'll keep you from doing that. And then also, if you know the stock suspension on a KLR, when you hit the front brake in an emergency situation, you want to stop real quick, that front end really dives on you.
It really does.
And so this suspension is going to allow, it'll make that so that doesn't happen, basically. Also, I want to say we're not sponsored. We have no affiliation with Cogent Dynamics. We were just pretty impressed with the suspension, so we bought it with our own money. So again, not sponsored. But if you appreciate the videos that we do on this channel, you want to support us, I'll have some links in the description below, some different ways you can support us. And anything else while we're doing the suspension, besides we also just love wrenching on bikes.
Just love working on bikes. Can't wait to get started.
All right, let's do it. All right, Oscar's down here ready to roll. But real quick before we get wrenching, make sure you hit that subscribe button and bell icon every time those are hit. Another biker joins the revolution. Me, Oscar. That's right, we'd love to have you be part of it. All right, so we're just getting started here. And yes, we are very blessed to have this lift and a mini jack. This is all Titan stuff. It makes it super easy working on bikes. And if you're interested, we do sell this lift setup and the mini jack and everything in the Law Abiding Biker store. I'll link to it in the description below. But just know we worked for years on bikes without lifts, and you can still do that. You could just have a regular jack under. As long as you can get the front wheel off the ground is really all you're going to need for this project. All right, and he's just breaking the left side fork cap here. He's got a 22 millimeter. It will take some force. He's got that one broken loose, it looks like, and then we'll move over and do the right side here. And he just got the right side one broken there. All right, now he's got a 12 millimeter, and up on the front here is his fork clamp bolts, the top triple tree. Of course, there's two on the right side, two on the left side. We also have a KLR lower dash on here. Might look a little different than yours. And check the channel, because we're going to put out a video on the installation of that lower dash, and I'll just move to the other side and get the other two. All right, now he's just moving down here, and this is just an 8 millimeter bolt here, and that's the lower brake line support, and he's just going to back that out, and you can kind of just let that dangle there. All right, the next thing we're going to work on is that upper brake line guide, and that's a 10 millimeter bolt on the back side is what he's going to be removing here. All right, and that's what he's doing there. You can see his 10 millimeter box end on the back side there. Just get the rest removed with his fingers. And once that's removed, he can pull that out. And again, we'll just kind of let all this dangle. All right, he's got his T-handle with the 12 millimeter on it, and he's going to break the caliper bolts here. And he got both those broke. He's just going to back both of those out. Once those are out, he can go ahead and just remove the brake caliper, and you can just let that dangle wherever you want. And if you're obsessive compulsive like Oscar here, you can go ahead and zip tie that brake caliper to our crash bars there so it doesn't just hang. Oscar's obsessive compulsive. And on the right side is just a Speedo cable guide. You remove that just like we did on the other side for the brake line. Now with a pair of channel locks, he's just going to break free his Speedo cable there. You can see he got that off. And we'll also just let that Speedo cable dangle. All right, and with a 6 millimeter hex head, he's breaking both of these front pinch clamp, axle pinch clamp bolts here. And there's two on the right side, two on the left side. And he'll just loosen those. All right, and leaving the nut on there so we don't mar the threads, you're just going to start tapping on this to push that axle through. Now you can take that nut off the rest of the way. And Oscar's just lifting the bike a little bit so we get that front wheel off the ground now. Okay, now his front wheel's off the ground. He's going to push his axle through there, get it out the rest of the way, and that should free the front wheel. All right, and with a 12 millimeter box end, 12 millimeter socket, he's just breaking the lower fork clamps. There's two bolts on the left side here, and then there's going to be two on the right side. And again, we're just loosening them. We're not taking them all the way out. And Oscar just moved around to the right side area. He's breaking those two fork clamp bolts. All right, and so we're at a point where we're going to remove the forks now. Now, if you wondered at the very beginning, we took the top fork cap nuts and we broke them. And the only reason we did that is it's easier to do those while the forks are on the bike gives you some leverage because they're very tight. So that's why we broke those while it was on the bike. And now he can go ahead and you just slide down with both the top and bottom fork clamps loose. You can pull these forks out. Just working on the other one there. All right, good to go. Okay, so again, this is why we broke these top fork nuts before we took it off the bike, because it was super tight. So now he can obviously just do it with his fingers there. And once this is off, we're going to start dumping our oil. So there's your fork cap. And he's going to start dumping this. The first thing that's going to come out is a spacer. All right, and you can see we're starting to drain the oil there, so he'll get a spacer out. We can just dump all this in our pan here. Next, we're going to look for is a washer. And that's the washer that goes right on top of the spring. And last is the actual stock spring itself. And this will go back together in a very similar fashion when we put the Cogent Dynamics stuff in. And then he can just go ahead and turn that upside down, and he's going to start actually working the fork there and draining the oil out. Oscar, you look pretty good at that. Is there a reason? You look... And then once he gets most of that out, he's just going to lean that up against the bike. And just for about a half hour here, we're just going to let this drain, make sure we get all the stock oil out of there. All right, so a couple of different things come with your Cogent Dynamics front suspension kit. The most important thing that came, you're going to need, and this is how you should always start, is with the 2 packs of Lifesavers they gave us. And once you open your Lifesaver pack, simply insert in your mouth. Very satisfying. Now you can begin the project. And before we fill this with oil, we're going to go ahead and compress the shock all the way. Make sure you do that. Now we just did this out of convenience. It's 5-grade oil, synthetic oil. You can use any brand you want. We just thought it was easiest. We were ordering from Cogent, and this is their the stuff they like to use. When we replace it at some point, we'll probably just replace it with AMS oil, but this will work fine. And again, it does come with the kit, but you can use any 5-grade. Just be aware of that. So this is a nice little tool we also bought from Cogent at the same time, and this makes it really easy. You'll see in a little bit to insert the valve into the fork tubes. Nonetheless, we're using it for another purpose too. You're going to need to measure 130 millimeters from the top of your fork. And you can see we've taken that rod and we put it on a tape measure, measured out 130 millimeters. And so he'll put that black Sharpie mark right at the top, and we'll fill it so it reaches the end of that rod. So you can kind of use that rod for 2 purposes. So make sure you measure something out. So Oscar's going to get started here with this 5-grade, and we're just going to fill it up part way, you know, maybe a 1/4 quart or something like that, because then we're going to have to pump these and get some of the air out of them. Okay, so now I can't. Oh my God, it just looks so wrong, dude. All right. All right, and now you just, after he has some oil in there, he just pumps the... Hang on, we gotta get this take right. All right, now that he has a little oil in there, he's just pumping the fork tube back and forth, and that purges the air out of it. So just give it a few good pumps like Oscar. Oscar's taking a break from pumping, and he's putting some more oil in, maybe another 1/4 quart. And he's looking for it inside there to see if he can even see it yet. And he's going to commence pumping up and down so he can purge the air out of there. All right, and you'll just basically listen when you're doing this, and you'll hear the air purging. When it becomes silent like this, you know that you have all the air. Also, once you can see the fluid in there, you can actually look down in and see that it's producing no bubbles, and that will tell you that you have the air all out of it. I'm going to add some more oil here, and we're going to finish topping it off to the proper level. All right, so he's getting close, and he's putting that rod that we marked at 130 millimeters from the top. Just kind of gauging where we're at. Going to add a little more oil. And there are specifications for this. This is for like a standard rider, KLR. Cogent has a really good setup. Just understand that you can, within certain parameters, take oil away or add more oil. Obviously, more oil would make the suspension stiffer, Removing oil would make it softer, but just make sure if you're going to play with that, that you're within the proper parameters. Yeah, looks close enough.
Oh yeah, for
Oscar,
sure.
you wipe my rod off. And before you proceed any further in this project, you'll need to eat some pizza because the lifesavers just aren't cutting it that Cogent sent. All right, as you can imagine, a ton of expenses, man hours, and effort go into keeping this channel going strong. Of course, there is a way you can support us by becoming a patron member. I will link to it in the description below. There are benefits for signing up, such as t-shirts and stickers. You can get into the troll-free private Facebook group. There's tons of awesome stuff going on in there. You get podcasts early, access to live video broadcasts and chat, up to access to our premium videos up on request. And don't forget, you get access to those awesome ride meetups and events. All right, let's get back into your video. All right, so you can see we have our stock spring, which is the shorter one, and behind it is our new Cogent Dynamics. And it's not only longer, but it looks like it's thicker too. All right, the next thing that comes in your kit is the DDCs, which is your drop-in damper cartridge. And this tool, of course, we got it. It's a special magnet on the end. Your threaded side of that damper cartridge goes down. And so it's just magnetized there. And just make sure that you put it straight down. And of course, our oil's already in there. And it's putting it nice and slow down there all the way till it bottoms out. Okay, and once that DDC's down in there, we leave the tool and the rod in there. He's going to put the new Cogent spring right over the top of the rod there and seat it all the way down in. And of course, while we're doing all this, the shock is compressed at this point. All right, you're going to reuse the stock washer, and that's going to go right over and seat on top of the spring. All right, so now he's going to pull the Cogent tool out of there and get that out of the way. And at this point, you can go ahead and extend your fork up. And he's got that extended all the way up. Now he can go in with the spacer that was provided by Cogent. All right, so the next thing we do to make sure everything is seated properly is on that same rod, we've just made another Sharpie mark. And you got to do it somewhere in between 9 and 11 millimeters. We've marked it right at 10 millimeters, right in the middle. And you want to measure from the top of your fork to the top of the spacer that's in there. And as you can see, we're sitting right within that range. We're sitting right at about 10, so we know everything's seated properly. Now he's going to just go ahead and go back on with his fork cap, and he'll get that tightened down just so stuff doesn't leak. We won't actually torque those down until we get them back on the bike. It'll give us some more leverage to torque them. All right, and with that, we can go ahead and slide the, we're doing the left side first, and he's just sliding the left fork back up in the lower clamp and then working it up into the top clamp there. And he's just working the right side fork back up in there. All right, so we're at the top of the triple clamp on the left side of the bike here. We took the fork cap off, and that's just to make sure that the fork is positioned so that the fork itself is right at the top of the triple tree. And once you get that in place, we can start tightening our pinch bolts down. He'll go ahead and get the cap finger started back on there. And he's just lining his forks up before we actually start tightening the pinch bolts. He just put his axle through there. That kind of lets you know that they are level and positioned right for putting our wheel on. All right, and you can just leave that in there really if you want. That way we make sure they don't get twisted while we're working on our pinch bolts and the clamps here. All right, and we're just working on the lower clamps here, 12 millimeter socket and a box end wrench on the back. He's just getting those tightened down. Make sure you do it kind of back and forth in succession. Don't just tighten one side down and then the other. You want that clamp to go down even. Of course, we've got the other one on the other side too. And at this point, he'll just get them snug and we will torque these to specs in a bit. All right, and we're just putting a little anti-seize grease on the front axle before we put it back in. And he's just lining up his wheel there, of course, and he's gonna work that axle back through. All right, and you can see he got his axle worked through there. All right, and he's going on with his axle nut, of course. Get it finger started. We will torque this to specs in a little bit. All right, and with his 10 millimeter wrench, he's just putting back on his Speedo cable guide here, getting it all in position. All right, and just putting his Speedo cable back in there. So when you put your speedometer on, just make sure that it's lined upright. On the inside of your fork is what they call a boss. It's really just a tab. And there's also a tab in the speedometer itself. So there's two tabs actually. So the fork tab goes in between the two tabs on the speedometer. You just want to make sure, when you look behind there, you'll see it's pretty self-explanatory, but make sure that's all lined up correctly. and get this all tightened down. And he'll just give it a little snug, of course, with his channel locks there. All right, and with his 6mm hex head there, just the 2 pinch bolts on the axle clamp on both sides. You're just gonna get those started. We will torque these to spec a little bit later. All right, and he's just getting his caliper back in place there and getting his bolts fingers started. 2 of them there. All right, and he's just getting these snug. We will torque these to specs in a bit. All right, and he's just putting his brake line guide in place there. You can see he got his bottom brake cable guide in place there. Got the bolt started. He's just working on the upper guide there. Getting his reflector in place along with the guide and going on the back side with that nut. And of course, he'll get those both snugged down with a wrench. All right, and with his torque wrench, he's just torquing this axle down to 65 foot-pounds. And there you go, he got it. All right, and just torquing down his pinch bolts, both of them, to 15 foot-pounds, or that converts to 180 inch-pounds. And he'll go around and do the other side too. All right, and with his torque wrench, 12mm socket, he's just torquing down his front caliper bolts there, 25 foot-pounds. A lot of guys will remove the front wheel without removing the brake caliper. You can certainly do that. It does just make it a little quicker for us, just to get it out of the way. All right, and just working on his lower fork clamp bolts with his torque wrench, and he's torquing them down to 15 foot-pounds, both of them, and just finishing off the bottom one there. All right, and with his torque wrench, he's just finishing up the top here with 15 foot-pounds. These are the top pinch bolts for the top fork clamp, and 2 on each side, and that's a 12mm socket, of course. All right, and with the 22mm socket, we're working on the fork caps. And with his torque wrench, he's going to torque those down to 22 foot-pounds. There we go. We got the other one torqued. All right, there you go. One Cogent DDC front fork kit for a KLR here installed. Can't wait to go ride this bad boy. Oscar, nice work.